I'll be honest, I can barely edit HTML documents, so when I first tried to edit macros, I felt a little lost. However, it's easier than you might think, and it lets you do some things that just can't be done by recording macros alone. Let's jump in and see how it works. One of the biggest reasons why you might want to edit macros is if you want to make a change to a macro that you've already recorded and you don't want to have to go through all the steps over again just to add a step or two to make your macro better. So for example, in a previous video in this series, I made a macro for turning anti-aliasing on and off. So in order to make this easier for you, instead of going through all those steps again, what I'll do is give you the file and you can just bring those into your own macros folder. So with the free exercise files that you can get without a premium subscription, you just want to go and get the AA off and AA on. I'll just select both of those. And let's hit Control C to copy these. And now let's go to our ZBrush installation folder. Pixelogic, ZBrush and the version number. We'll go to Z Startup, Macros, MISC, and let's just paste it in here, Control V. Okay, now that that's pasted in, let's go into ZBrush and try to use it. I've just got any old model here. It doesn't really matter for this video, but I just want to have something to demonstrate on. Now we can go into Macro, and we need to reload all macros. Since we added some macros to that folder, since we started, we need to click that so we can reload it all. Okay, so we've got the AA on button. This will turn anti-aliasing on. So if you notice before I hit it, there's kind of the pixelated jagged edge around the model. If we go to Macro and turn AA on, you can see now we've got, well, if I hit F to frame, so it zooms into the maximum viewport, you can see now we've got a softer anti-aliased edge around the model. Now this is great except for one thing. When I hit the button, the viewport lost the orientation of the model on the screen. So I want to make an adjustment to this macro so that it keeps the model in the right place. So what I'm going to do is record a new macro for just that portion of it, and then edit the macros to combine the functions to keep the model in the same place on the screen with the previous anti-aliasing macro. Okay, so let's make it happen. I'm going to go into Macro, and let's click New Macro to start a new one. And I'm going to click No, even though ZBrush says yes. It's really better if you hit No. Now what we need is to go into Edit, and we want to store the object placement. And let's just see what happens. Let's move the model a little bit. We'll go back up to Edit and Restore Placement. Okay, you can see that it basically stored the position of the model on screen into memory, and then when I clicked Restore Placement, it put it back where it belongs. So we can now edit this macro and use those functions to control how the model is on the screen after it goes into anti-aliasing mode. So let's close this macro by going to Macro, End Macro. And I'm just going to save this as a temporary file, just temp. Doesn't really matter where you save it, but I'm going to save it under the macros folder. Okay, so now with that saved, let's go into our Explorer and let's go into the macros folder. We'll double click on this temp.txt and we'll see what it's doing here. Now there's some things that all macros have in common. They all start out by saying what version of ZBrush it was recorded in. There's this one function called iShowActions. I'm not exactly sure what that does, but it's in all macros. And then the configuration of the version of ZBrush that you're working with. And after that is where all of the functions go that you defined when you were recording the macro. So first we see here, I press. That means we pressed a button under the Edit menu and the Tool submenu. And this is the button that we clicked, Store. And then Canvas Stroke, this is when I rotated the model. So this is recording all of the stroke that I made on the screen to rotate the model. Then after I rotated the model, you can see I hit another button, I press, the same path, Edit, Tool, and then I clicked on Restore Placement. So let's cannibalize this macro for just the portions that we need. I don't need this canvas stroke portion, so I'm going to select that and delete it. Also, we don't need this ending bracket because the macro that we're going to paste this into will already have one. And then we don't need the stuff that comes with all macros because the other macro will have this as well. So let's delete that. So really, I just want these two. So I'm going to copy and paste this, Control C, and we can close this. And it doesn't matter, I don't need to save it. We'll go into MISC. We'll open up the AA-on macro. Okay, so you can see in here, this was made in a previous version of ZBrush, but that's okay. It'll still work in 4.8. And you can see this macro, what it's doing is it's setting up all the stuff for the anti-aliasing. So for example, it's changing the document size, the document resolution, other things. And then after I put it into anti-alias mode, I also needed to do a canvas stroke to bring the model back into the canvas. So that needs to stay there. And then it needs to go into edit mode. So before we change to anti-alias mode, we want to store the placement. So I'm going to come in here after the iConfig and we'll just hit Control V to paste this. So we want it to press the store button, which is good, but we don't want to restore the placement until after everything else is done. So I'm just going to hit Control X on that, backspace to just remove that space, come down here to the last entry, hit enter, and then Control V to paste that in. So now we've got it storing the position of the model on the screen, then it goes through and does everything it needs to do, and then it restores the placement. Now there's one thing that's kind of weird about the restore placement button actually. Let me show you in ZBrush. So here under edit, you can see that restore placement, it's actually a binary toggle. It can be on or off. And so that's a little bit weird. It really shouldn't be a binary, but I think they made a mistake and made this a binary button. What happens if you turn anti-aliasing off and then back on again, this button will already be in the on mode and it won't actually work if you try to click it again. So what we need to do is add a function to turn this button off after we've restored the placement. So back here in our macro, what I'm going to do is make a duplicate of this. Actually, I've already got it in memory, so I'm just going to hit enter and hit Control V one more time. What we want to do is add an unpress. So I'm going to change this from iPress to iUnpress with a capital U. So what this does is it tells it to press this button, but to turn it off. Basically, that'll make it ready for the next time. If we want to go back and forth in and out of anti-alias mode, this will make it so it's ready to go for the next time. Okay, with this done, let's save this. Go back into ZBrush and let's go into macro and let's just turn anti-aliasing off since it's on right now. So you can see we're back now to having these jagged pixelized edges. Let's go back into macro and we need to reload all macros since we made a change to one of them since the last time we started ZBrush. Okay, with them all reloaded, let's move our model into some view that we wouldn't have thought to have it otherwise, just so we know if it's moving or not. We'll go to macro and AA on. All right, you can see the model is now in the same place it was before. This is really handy because often if I know I want to go into anti-alias mode for like recording a turntable or something, I'll put the model in the right place that it should be, and then I remember to turn on anti-aliasing. And so before I made this change to my macro, then I would turn on anti-aliasing and the model would shift to a different position, and then I'd have to reposition the model again where I wanted it to be. But now that I've added this section about storing and restoring the placement, it just works the way you'd expect it to, and you don't have to worry about repositioning the model after going into anti-alias mode. Now there's one other reason why it's important to know how to edit macros, and that is if you want to use any macros that use buttons in the Z plugin menu. For some reason, macros don't record any buttons you press from this menu. So for example, if you want to go into the 3D Print Hub and record a macro that updates the size ratios, for example, it's just not going to record that because it's in the Z plugin menu. So what you want to do is hold down Control over one of these buttons, and you can see in this little pop-up here to the left, the Z script button path. So it says Z plugin, 3D Print Hub, stage 2, update size ratios. So what you need to do is if you want to add this function into a macro, you have to take note of that button path. And then when you go to edit, So for example, it would be I press comma and then that button path. And so you have to kind of almost take a screen capture of what it says because you can't really look at it at the same time. So I might just hover over this and hit print screen and then open that in an image viewer alongside this so I can really, type it in the way it should go. But that's what you have to do, unfortunately, if you want to make a macro involving anything from the Z plugin menu. All right, since we've already got this saved, I don't need to save it since I added that return there. Now I know that editing macros can be a lot more technical than a lot of people signed on for with ZBrush, but I know for me, it's really made it so that I can streamline my process just that much more.